This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 78 of the 1001 Movies podcast, based on the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This week, I'll be talking about Paisan, the 1946 film directed by Roberto Rossellini.
Yeah, now you're all alike. Before it was different somehow. Remember when we first came into Rome? How long ago was it? You know, when we finally broke through. The girls were all happy and laughing. Fresh, full of color. Beautiful. Gave us a funny feeling. And now it's all different.
In 1945, Italian neorealist filmmaker Roberto Rossellini released Rome Open City. This was his first footprint in international cinema, and although the full story of its merits is the subject of a future episode, it was the film that garnered Rossellini funding to make another film, this time with American money and a distribution deal that would eventually be taken over by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. The film was originally going to be about the American liberation of post-World War II Italy, but Rossellini wanted to focus more on the plights of the Italian people, although the Americans do feature heavily in the film. Paisan was written by 6 screenwriters, the most notable of which was Federico Fellini, each of which wrote an episode for the 6 chapters that Rossellini planned to break the film up into. Each story was its own segment with no framing storyline. They include the story of an Italian village girl who helps an American patrol only to be killed by the Germans, an American military policeman who is disgusted by the slums and poverty in Naples, a drunken American soldier who doesn't realize that the prostitute who has taken him home is in actuality his long-lost love, an American nurse who braves the streets of war-torn Florence only to discover that her lover is dead, an abbey of monks who take in 3 American chaplains and are chagrined to discover one is a Protestant and another a Jew, and finally the tragic end of a group of partisans and Americans fighting in the German-occupied Po Delta. If Rome Open City was Rossellini's first foray into Italian neorealism, then Paisan cemented him as a true pioneer of the subgenre. He seemed to go out of his way to hire a mix of actors and non-actors in the film, giving it a documentary feeling which, matched with the static camera work and broad dialogue, seemed to establish the very definition of neorealist filmmaking. The approach must have been best described by critic André Besna, always a fan of Rossellini's, who wrote, "The unit of cinematic narrative in Paisan is not the shot, an abstract of reality which is being analyzed, but the fact, a fragment of concrete reality, in itself multiple and full of ambiguity, whose meaning emerges only afterwards, thanks to other imposed facts, between which the mind establishes certain relationships." Although Rossellini claims the film didn't do well in its native country, internationally it was a smashing success and was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Story and Screenplay, as well as a BAFTA for Best Film from Any Source. Today, Paisan is considered the second part of Rossellini's War Trilogy, with Rome Open City and the subsequent Germany Year Zero. Roberto Rossellini went on to become one of the most celebrated Italian filmmakers during a time when Italy was just beginning to make its footprint in world cinema. He would go on to make films like Europa 51 and Voyage in Italy, both of which are subjects of future episodes, which will no doubt discuss more of the director's effect on post-war cinema. What did I think of Paisan? I tried. I really did try. Adrian Martin, who wrote the entry for this film in 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, observed, "Anyone approaching Paisan without foreknowledge of its status as a neorealist masterpiece could be forgiven for giving up early on. Stock footage of the American campaign in Italy, Hollywood-style music, bad actors, barking military commands." Martin goes on to explain that one can't truly appreciate the film until the end of the 6th and final episode. I think this is the first time I've quoted directly from the book this podcast is inspired by, because I can't think of one sentence I couldn't agree more with, followed by another I couldn't disagree more with. I hope you trust my opinion, dear listener, as someone who has given every film he's watched for this project a good fighting chance, having very recently rained praises on even a 3-hour Bollywood epic from 1957 that would have been dismissed as boring by most casual viewers. Paisan is not only a slog, but the filmmaking is distractingly bad. Well, I'm sure Rossellini intended to make a statement using non-actors. They serve only to distract the viewers, at least those that speak English. The American soldiers in the first episode seem to have been plucked from a 1950s low-budget science fiction picture. But actors can be forgiven, but when paired with editing that seems almost random at times, one really begins to lose hope in this film. Most of the 6 episodes have some sort of tragic conclusion, and from what I've read, the first and the last seem to be the most effective. Unfortunately, the timing of the shots made it impossible for me to determine what happened at the end of the first segment. Did Carmela fall from the cliff? Was she shot by the Germans? The fact that I had to look this up for an answer may not speak well for my viewing comprehension, but imagine my surprise when not only did I learn the Germans shot her, but that the Americans, seconds later, were thinking that she killed their brother-in-arms before taking her own life. The 6th sequence is indeed the most jarring, with the brutal shooting of a family off-screen, followed by the execution by drowning of the partisans they supported. Not only is the scene visually jarring, but the fact that the Americans were complicit in the partisans' involvement and perhaps may be responsible for their deaths weighs heavily on the mind. However, this effect comes too late to save the film, and I still wanted my 2 hours and 6 minutes back. The only segment that has absolutely no place in the film, and perhaps it was placed there rather awkwardly between 2 other chapters that were completely different in tone, is the 5th one, about the 3 chaplains visiting the Franciscan monastery and how the flabbergasted monks deal with the discovery that 2 of the chaplains aren't even Catholic. This results in some interesting dialogue, but where the other 5 segments end with abrupt and ironic conclusions, this one just sort of faded out, giving me the impression that 5 minutes were cut from the end for time. I suspect, but I don't know for sure, that 1940s audiences liked the episodic format of 6 stories in one, something that would become popular in the years to come with horror films. This may be why the film snagged an Oscar nomination, but everything else in the film smacks of mediocre acting, dialogue that tries to take itself a little too seriously, and foregone conclusions. If I have to say one positive thing about the film, it would be about the 2nd episode, featuring an African-American serviceman who befriends a homeless Italian orphan. This remains the only segment that says a great deal without having to spell it out for us, not to mention the fact that it has 2 of the best performances in the movie. Now, I know that there are people out there who adore this movie, but I am obviously not one of them. Someday, I may give it another try. It may get better with my age, or I admit maybe some chemical influences. At the moment, however, Paisan ranks with the likes of Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors as one of my least favorite films in my quest to see all 1001 on the list. That's all I have to say about Paisan. Tune in next week when I talk about 1997's The Ice Storm, directed by Ang Lee. In the meantime, feel free to email me any questions or comments at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at 1001movieспc. And please, if you haven't done so already, leave a nice review on iTunes. Until next time, happy viewing.